Elias sat suspended in a vibrating cage of steel and glass, 10 feet above the frozen earth. The cab of the Oshkosh snowplow was a sensory paradox. Inside, it was a sweltering box of diesel fumes, stale coffee, and the deafening roar of the heater. Outside, it was a vacuum of absolute zero. He was clearing Route 9, a treacherous snake of asphalt winding through the Cascade foothills. Tonight, however, the road didn't exist. The headlights of the plow, usually powerful enough to burn through the darkest night, were reflecting off a wall of falling snow so dense it felt solid. It was the hypnotic phenomenon known as snow blindness, where the white flakes rushing toward the windshield created a dizzying, tunnel vision effect, erasing all sense of speed and direction. Elias wasn't driving by sight anymore. He was driving by the rumble of the plow, blades scraping the hidden tarmac and the muscle memory of 20 years on the job. The radio crackled, cutting through the mechanical drone. "Plow 4, this is dispatch. You copy, Elias?" Elias grabbed the mic, his voice raspy. "Copy, dispatch. I'm at mile marker 22. It's getting soupy out here." "Karen, I can barely see the hood ornament." "Yeah, we know. The National Weather Service just upgraded this to a historic event. We're closing the pass. The gates are coming down at the bottom. You are the last soul on the mountain. Elias, clear the southbound lane to the turnaround. Then get your ass back to base. Do not stop. Repeat, do not stop." "Understood," Elias muttered, hanging up the mic. "Last soul on the mountain." The words hung in the cab, heavier than the humid air. He checked his side mirrors, vast rectangular wings of glass. Behind him, the red taillights of the plow illuminated a swirling vortex of red snow. There was no traffic, no brave skiers, no lost tourists, just him, the machine, and the storm that wanted to bury the world. 3 miles later, the monotony was broken. Elias saw a shape. It wasn't a rock or a fallen tree. It was the distinct geometric glint of metal that didn't belong in nature. He squinted, leaning forward against the steering wheel. Through the swirling white chaos, a silhouette emerged on the shoulder of the road, half buried in a snowdrift. It was a sedan, a dark blue Subaru, listing heavily to the left. The snow had already piled up to the windows, suggesting it had been there for at least an hour. "Damn it!" Elias hissed. He knew the order, do not stop. But the code of the mountain was older than the orders from dispatch. You don't leave people to freeze in a blizzard. If someone was in that car, they were already on borrowed time. He downshifted, the massive engine, groaning as he brought the 30-ton beast to a shuddering halt 50 feet past the derelict car. Elias grabbed his heavy flashlight and zipped his parka to his chin. He kicked the door open, and the wind hit him like a physical blow, screaming in his ears and stealing the breath from his lungs. The temperature was violently cold, freezing the moisture in his nose instantly. He trudged through the knee-deep powder toward the Subaru. He swept the beam of light over the windows. "Sheriff's Department. Anyone in there?" He roared over the wind. He wiped the frost from the driver's side window. The interior was dark. He tried the handle. It was unlocked. He pulled the door open. The dome light flickered on weakly. Empty. No driver. No passengers. A half-eaten bag of chips on the passenger seat and a phone charger dangling from the dash. But no phone. The keys were gone. He touched the hood. The engine was stone cold. They hadn't just slid off the road. They had left. But where? The nearest town was 20 miles back, and the shelter was 10 miles forward. Elias swung the light toward the ground near the driver's door. The snow was falling fast, filling in depressions within minutes, but he could still make them out. Footprints, but they didn't lead back to the road. They didn't lead toward the plow. They led straight over the snowbank and into the dense black forest. Elias frowned, a cold prickle of unease running down his spine that had nothing to do with the wind. Why would anyone walk into the woods in a whiteout? It was suicide. He followed the tracks with his light for a few yards. Then he stopped. The spacing was wrong. The first few steps were normal, a struggling trudge. But then the gap between the prints widened. 4 feet, 6 feet, 10 feet. "What the hell?" Elias whispered. The last visible track was a deep, crater-like depression in the snow, and the next one was nowhere to be seen, as if the driver had simply launched themselves into the sky. Elias scrambled back to the plow, the silence of the woods feeling suddenly predatory. He climbed into the cab, slammed the door, and locked it, a reflex he never usually bothered with. He threw the transmission into drive and gunned the engine, desperate to get the heater working again. He drove for 10 minutes, his heart rate slowly returning to normal. Just a panic response, he told himself. The guy probably got picked up by a trucker before the storm got bad. Then he saw it. Right in the center of his high beams, a tall, thin figure stood in the middle of the road. Elias slammed the brakes, the plow blade grinding against the asphalt, sending up a shower of sparks. The truck skidded, fishtailing on the ice. He braced for the sickening thud of impact, but there was nothing. The snow swirled in the headlights. The road was empty. No blood, no body. Just the endless falling white. Elias sat idling, his hands shaking on the wheel. He grabbed the radio mic again. "Dispatch, this is Plow 4. Dispatch, come in." Static. A harsh, white noise hissed that rose and fell like breathing. "Karen? Anyone? I think I saw someone on the road. Mile marker 25. Nothing. The storm must have knocked out the repeater tower on the peak." He was truly alone now. He checked his cell phone. No service. He looked out into the storm. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. It wasn't just the isolation. It was a specific, heavy pressure, like the air pressure dropping before a tornado. He put the truck in gear. He needed to keep moving. Momentum was safety. If he stopped, the snow would bury him. If he stopped, whatever he thought he saw might catch up. The plow roared on, clearing the lane. But over the growl of the diesel engine, a new sound emerged. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the right side of the cab. Elias turned his head. The passenger window was a square of black night, frosted at the edges. Tap, tap, scrape. It sounded like a branch brushing against the metal, but there were no trees this close to the road. He was on the bridge section now, suspended over a valley. There was nothing out there but air and snow. "Ice," he muttered to himself. Just ice breaking off the frame. But the rhythm was too deliberate. It sounded like a fingernail testing the glass. He turned on the side-mounted work light. The beam cut into the darkness, illuminating the swirling flakes next to the window. There was nothing there, but as soon as he turned the light off, the tapping returned, slightly louder this time. Image prompts. The passenger side window of the truck cab. It is dark outside, but a faint, blurry shape seems to be pressing against the glass. Elias leaning away from the passenger door, looking at it with suspicion and fear, the interior cab light casting long shadows. He pushed the accelerator, bringing the plow up to 30 miles per hour. Dangerous speeds for these conditions. He just wanted to get off the bridge. He focused on the road ahead. The snow was mesmerizing, hypnotizing. Then he saw the tracks again. Fresh footprints were appearing in the snow in front of the plow. Elias blinked, his brain refusing to process the information. He was moving at 30 miles per hour. The snow was falling at 2 inches an hour. For tracks to be visible in front of him, someone, or something, had to be running ahead of the truck, matching his speed, staying just at the edge of his headlight's reach. And the stride. The tracks were appearing in sets of 2, but spaced 15 feet apart. Whatever was making them was bounding, leaping with impossible power, staying just out of sight in the white void. It was toying with him, leading him. Elias fixated on the tracks, terrified and fascinated. What has legs that long? He didn't see the patch of black ice on the curve. He didn't see the wind-fell pine tree that had snapped and landed across the lane until it was too late. The tracks swerved around the tree effortlessly. Elias slammed on the brakes. The plow blade caught the trunk of the pine. The force of the impact was catastrophic. The truck shuddered violently, the steering wheel snapping out of his hands. The plow climbed the tree trunk, lifting the front wheels off the ground, then slewed sideways. The world spun. The truck slid toward the embankment. Gravity took over. The plow tipped, sliding nose first into the deep ditch, crunching through brush and snow until it came to a violent, jarring halt at a 45-degree angle. Elias was thrown against the harness, his head cracking against the side window. Then silence. The engine coughed once and died. Elias groaned, tasting copper. Blood trickled from his hairline. He fumbled for the ignition key, turning it frantically. The engine chugged, whir, whir, click, but wouldn't catch. The fuel line might be severed or the tank ruptured. The heater fan spun down into silence. The lights on the dashboard flickered and died, leaving him with only the battery-powered emergency strobe on the roof, which cast a rhythmic, sickening amber pulse over the whiteout. Flash, dark, flash, dark. With the engine dead, the cold was immediate. It didn't seep in. It rushed in. The metal of the cab, previously his shield, became a conductor for the freezing night. Elias realized with a jolt of pure terror that he wasn't a driver anymore. He was canned meat. He grabbed the radio mic, screaming into the dead air, begging for a signal that wasn't there. He sat in the dark, listening. The wind howled outside, but beneath the wind, he heard the sound again. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Footsteps. Heavy, crunching steps on the hard-packed snow. Not one set, many. They were circling the plow. Elias grabbed the remote for the roof-mounted spotlight. It was on a separate battery circuit. He prayed it still worked. He toggled the switch. A beam of pure white light cut through the amber strobe, sweeping across the ditch. They were standing on the ridge of the road, looking down at him. 3 of them. They were tall. Impossibly tall, maybe 8 or 9 feet. They were thin and pale, their skin the color of dirty ice. They had no clothes, just that stark, white flesh that blended perfectly with the blizzard. If they stood still, they were invisible. But the spotlight caught the reflection of their eyes. Small, black, light-absorbing pits. Elias killed the light, terrified that seeing them made it real. He huddled into his parka, pulling his arms inside the sleeves. The temperature in the cab was dropping towards 0. He could hear them moving closer. They didn't rush. They moved with a jerky, insect-like curiosity. He heard a scrape on the roof. The metal groaned under a significant weight. One of them was on top of the plow. The windshield began to frost over rapidly, turning opaque. But it wasn't just the cold. The frost was forming patterns, spirals, fractals. It was as if the cold was being directed at him. He could see his own breath clouding in front of him. But the cloud didn't dissipate. It hung in the air, seemingly drawn toward the vents, sucked out by the presence outside. He was losing body heat faster than physics should allow. His mind began to swim. Hypothermia, he thought, or they are feeding. A screech of metal on glass shattered his stupor. A hand, no, a claw, dragged across the passenger window, cutting through the thick frost. It wiped a clear circle in the ice. An eye pressed against the glass. It stared at him. Then a mouth opened, vertical slit in the pale flesh filled with needle-like translucent teeth. It didn't roar. It clicked, a rapid chittering sound like ice cracking on a lake. Elias scrambled backward, pressing himself against the driver's door. He grabbed the only weapon he had, a roadside emergency flare gun. His hands were numb, clumsy blocks of wood. He fumbled with the latch, trying to load a cartridge. The door handle on the passenger side clicked. He had locked it, hadn't he? He watched in horror as the lock plunger slowly, impossible, began to rise. The cold hadn't just frozen the door. It had manipulated the mechanism. The lock clicked open. The door groaned, the seal of ice breaking. Elias didn't wait. He snapped the flare gun shut, aimed at the widening crack in the door, and pulled the trigger. Boom! The interior of the cab exploded in blinding red light and choking smoke. The flare hit the creature in the chest. It shrieked, a sound like tearing metal, and fell backward off the step. The heat was intense, searing Elias's eyebrows. He didn't check to see if it was dead. He kicked his own door open, tumbling out into the snow on the driver's side. The cold air hit him, but the adrenaline was hotter. He saw the red glow of the burning flare illuminating the snow on the other side of the plow, casting long, dancing shadows of the other things. They were recoiling from the fire. He had a choice: stay in the metal coffin or run into the white void. He saw the tree line. He ran. The storm broke at dawn. The sky was a piercing, innocent blue. The rescue crew arrived at 8 a.m. They found the plow in the ditch at mile marker 28. The engine was cold. The passenger door was wide open. The interior was scorched black from a flare that had burned itself out on the floor mat. "Elias!" the foreman shouted, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. There was no answer. They found footprints, a single set of heavy boot prints leading away from the driver's side, stumbling toward the tree line. The rescue team followed them. 50 yards into the woods, the boot prints stopped. They didn't end at a tree or a cliff. They just stopped. Alongside the last boot print was another mark, a long, deep depression in the snow, like a landing pad for something heavy. And from that point on, there were no human tracks, only a single set of tracks, spaced 20 feet apart, leading deeper into the mountains. Arthur sat in the center of the frozen expanse, a tiny speck of darkness on a canvas of white. The ice fishing shack was little more than a plywood coffin, smelling of propane and damp wool. Outside, the wind howled, but it was the sound beneath him that unsettled him the most. The lake was singing, a phenomenon caused by the ice shifting and expanding. It produced deep, resonant groans and sharp cracks that sounded like sonic booms echoing from the deep. He cranked the auger, the blades chewing through 2 feet of solid ice, until they punched through to the black water below. He wasn't here for the fish. He was here because the empty nursery at home was too loud. His son, Leo, had drowned in this lake during the summer, and Arthur felt a morbid, magnetic pull to the water. He lowered his line, the lead weight disappearing into the abyss, and waited for the ghosts of his grief to speak. An hour passed in silence. The heater hummed, fighting a losing battle against the Minnesota winter. Arthur stared into the circular hole, a perfect black eye staring back at him. Suddenly the line jerked. It wasn't the nibble of a perch. It was a heavy, dead weight. He reeled it in slowly. Breaking the surface wasn't a prize fish, but a monstrosity. It was a bottom feeder, pale and translucent, its scales missing in patches to reveal raw, jelly-like flesh. It had no eyes, just smooth indentations where they should have been. It flopped wetly onto the wooden floorboards, gasping. Arthur recoiled, disgusted. He kicked the thing back toward the hole. As it slid into the water, he swore he saw something else ripple deep below. Not a fish, but a light. It was a faint phosphorescent glow, like a distant flashlight underwater, that flickered once and vanished. The unease in his gut tightened. The water looked thicker now, like oil, absorbing the light from his lantern rather than reflecting it. He should have packed up then. But the line tugged again, violent and demanding. Arthur grabbed the rod, expecting a fight, but there was no resistance. Just that heavy, sodden drag. He reeled, the line cutting droplets of water into the air. The hook breached the surface, snagged on thick red wool. Arthur froze. He reached down and unhooked the object. It was a child's mitten. A red mitten with a white snowflake pattern knitted into the palm. Leo's mitten. Arthur's breath hitched, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Leo had lost this mitten the winter before he died. It had been lost for a year. It should be rotten, covered in algae, stiff with ice. Arthur squeezed it. It wasn't wet. It wasn't cold. It was warm. It felt as if it had just been pulled off a living hand mere seconds ago. The heat radiating from the wool burned his palm, a terrifying impossibility that defied every law of nature. Arthur dropped the mitten as if it were a live coal. It hit the floor, looking impossibly bright against the dirty wood. Simultaneously, the ambient noises of the lake, the groans, the cracks, the wind ceased. The silence that followed was heavy and pressurized, like the air in a submarine. Then a new sound began. Scritch, scritch, scritch. It was coming from directly beneath his feet. Not from the water, but from the underside of the ice floor he was standing on. It sounded like fingernails desperate to dig through wood. It moved in a circle, tracing the perimeter of the shack. Arthur. The voice didn't come through his ears. It bloomed inside his skull, wet and gurgling, sounding like his name was being spoken through a mouthful of lake water. It was a mimicry of Leo's voice, but distorted, pitched too low. "It's cold, Daddy. Open the door." The scratching intensified, becoming frantic clawing, vibrating the floorboards beneath his boots. The predator was no longer hiding its presence. Arthur stumbled back, knocking over his stool. The rational part of his brain screamed that this was hallucination, a breakdown caused by grief and isolation. But the scratching was physical. He could feel the vibrations in his soles. Drawn by a horrific compulsion, he looked into the hole again. The water was rising. Just inches below the surface, a face floated. It was Leo. Or it was a sculpture of Leo made of wet dough. The hair was slicked back, drifting like seaweed. The skin was the color of curdled milk. But the eyes were pure white, devoid of irises or pupils, glowing with that same faint phosphorescence he had seen earlier. The mouth hung open in a slack, impossible O-shape, too wide for a human jaw. The thing stared up at him. The mouth moved, synchronizing perfectly with the voice in his head. "Let me in." It wasn't a request. It was a command. A pale hand, long and boneless, rose from the depths toward the rim. Panic, sharp and primal, finally shattered his paralysis. Arthur turned and lunged for the door. He grabbed the metal handle, desperate for the biting wind and the safety of the open ice. He shoved. The door didn't budge. He threw his shoulder against it, screaming, but it was fused shut. He looked at the hinges, a thick layer of unnatural. Milky frost was spreading rapidly across the wood, blooming like mold. The temperature inside the shack plummeted instantly. His breath turned into thick, choking clouds of steam. The propane heater sputtered and died, the flame choked out by the supernatural cold. He was trapped. The shack had become a freezer. He kicked the door, the wood cracking but not yielding. The frost was moving toward him, crawling across the floorboards, seeking the heat of his body. Behind him, the splashing sound grew louder. The thing wasn't just looking anymore. It was breaching. He could hear wet flesh slapping against the ice. Arthur spun around, his back to the frozen door. The horror in the center of the room had evolved. The auger hole, originally only 8 inches wide, was melting. The ice around the rim hissed and steamed as if subjected to intense acid. The hole expanded rapidly, widening to 2 feet, then 3. The black water surged up, flooding the floorboards with freezing slush. From the widening maw, 2 hands emerged. They grasped the edges of the floor. They were pale, bloated, and tipped with translucent, jagged nails. Arms followed, 2 long, with extra joints that bent backward. The head rose next. The Leo mask was slipping, revealing something ancient and predatory beneath the wet skin. "Daddy," the voice gurgled, now echoing audibly in the room, vibrating the walls. "I'm so warm now." Arthur grabbed the ice auger, wielding it like a spear, but there was nowhere to run. The floorboards beneath him groaned, no longer able to support the weight of the water and the thing climbing out of it. 3 days later, the county sheriff found the shack. It had collapsed inward, a pile of splintered wood and twisted metal sitting on the ice. The storm had passed, leaving the lake pristine and silent. They cleared the debris, expecting to find a body frozen to the floor or drowned in the hole. They found nothing. No Arthur, no Red Mitten. The heater was there, crushed. The auger was there, bent at a sharp angle. The hole Arthur had drilled had frozen over again, sealed by new, clear ice. The sheriff shone his flashlight down onto the new surface. He recoiled, his face paling. Trapped within the transparency of the new ice were scratches, deep, frantic gouges, but they weren't on the top. They were on the underside of the ice. They were the desperate claw marks of a man who had been dragged under, trying to dig his way back up before the water sealed him in forever. Sarah sat on the big velvet sofa. The house was huge and very old. It belonged to her rich aunt. Outside, A winter storm was hitting the windows with hard snow. It was very loud. Inside it was warm and cozy. Sarah was watching a movie on her tablet. Suddenly, a loud crack sounded outside. The lights in the house flickered and then died. The TV turned off. The hum of the heater stopped. The house became totally silent. Sarah stood up. It was pitch black. She felt a little scared. This house was a smart home. That meant everything ran on electricity. When the power died, the electronic locks on the doors made a clicking sound. Click-clack. They unlocked automatically for safety. Now, the big front door was unlocked. Sarah shivered. It wasn't cold yet, but the silence felt heavy. She needed to find a flashlight. Sarah found a box of emergency candles in the kitchen drawer. She lit one with a small lighter. The small yellow flame gave a little bit of light. She felt better. She walked into the hallway. The windows were all closed tight. But suddenly the candle flame started to dance. It moved wildly to the left, then to the right. It looked like someone was blowing on it gently. Sarah stopped walking. "Hello?" she whispered. There was no answer, but she felt a cold breeze touch her ankles. It felt like an invisible snake moving across the floor. The air in the hallway became very chilly. Then puff, the candle flame went out. Sarah was in the dark again. She quickly flicked her lighter. The flame came back, but it was small. She realized the draft wasn't coming from outside. It was moving inside the house. Sarah thought maybe a fuse had blown. She decided to check the basement breaker box. She walked down the wooden stairs. The basement was much colder than the rest of the house. It was freezing. She held her lighter up to see. She breathed out, and a cloud of white fog came from her mouth. It was just like being outside in winter, but the fog didn't disappear. Usually, breath fades away quickly. This white cloud stayed in the air. It floated in front of her. Slowly, the fog started to change shape. It looked like the top part of a person. A head and shoulders made of mist. Sarah's heart beat very fast. The shape moved toward her. It wasn't drifting. It was hunting. The lighter flame flickered and turned blue. Sarah screamed and ran back up the stairs. She didn't care about the electricity anymore. She just wanted to get away. Sarah ran into the kitchen. She tried to think. It was getting colder every second. She could see her breath everywhere now. She realized something scary. The cold thing wasn't just a ghost. It was hungry. It wanted heat. She ran to the gas stove. "Fire," she whispered. "I need fire." She turned the knob. Click, click, whoosh. A blue flame appeared on the stove burner. Immediately, the air in the room rushed toward the stove. It felt like a vacuum cleaner sucking up the air. The blue fire on the stove didn't grow big. Instead, it started to shrink. The cold presence was wrapping around the stove. It was eating the fire. The flame sputtered and died. The metal of the stove turned white with frost instantly. Sarah pulled her hand away. The metal burned her skin because it was so cold. Sarah ran upstairs to the master bedroom. It was the thickest door in the house. She slammed it shut and locked it. She grabbed every blanket from the bed and wrapped them around herself. She sat in the corner of the room, shaking. She stared at the bottom of the door. There was a small gap between the wood and the carpet. At first, nothing happened. Then a thin line of white frost started to creep under the door. It looked like white fingers stretching into the room. The temperature dropped fast. The water in a glass on the nightstand started to turn to ice. Sarah tried to use her lighter again. The flint sparked, but the flame wouldn't catch. The air was too cold. The entity was in the room with her. It wasn't walking. It was filling the space like cold water filling a bathtub. The room was now freezing. It was colder than a freezer. Sarah's eyelashes had tiny icicles on them. She couldn't feel her toes. Suddenly, a loud noise made her jump. Crack! The glass of water on the bedside table exploded. The water inside had frozen so fast that it expanded and broke the glass. Sharp pieces of ice and glass flew onto the floor. Sarah knew she was next. If she stayed here, she would freeze to death. The cold was pressing against her blankets. It felt heavy. She could feel the heat leaving her body. It felt like being drained. She dug into her pocket and found the lighter again. She warmed it in her hands, blowing warm breath on it. "Please," she begged. Please work. She needed just a little spark to keep the monster back. Sarah struck the lighter. Flick. A tiny orange flame appeared. It was weak, but it was hot. The cold air recoiled. The frost on the floor stopped moving forward. The entity didn't like the direct fire. Sarah held the lighter out like a sword. The metal top of the lighter got hot, burning her thumb, but she didn't let go. Then she heard it. It wasn't a wind sound anymore. It was a voice. It was right next to her ear, soft and icy. So warm. The flame on the lighter flickered and went out. The fuel was empty. Sarah screamed in the dark. She felt icy fingers touch her neck. But suddenly, zzzt, a loud buzz sounded. The ceiling light flashed on. The heater roared to life in the vent. The power was back. The room flooded with bright yellow light and warm air. The monster vanished instantly. It couldn't survive in the light and heat. The room felt normal again. The frost on the floor melted into wet puddles. Sarah didn't wait. She grabbed her car keys and ran downstairs. She ran out the front door into the snow. The storm outside felt warm compared to the thing inside the house. She got into her car and locked the doors. Before she drove away, she looked in the rearview mirror to check her face. She looked pale, but then she saw something that made her scream. On her shoulder, on her thick wool sweater, there was a patch of white frost. It was melting quickly, dripping water. But for a second, the shape was perfect. It was the shape of a large handprint with long fingers. It had been holding on to her just before the lights came on.